Michael Caine is 93 years old now, and almost everyone who shaped the first half of his career is gone. Roger Moore is gone. Laurence Olivier is gone. Sean Connery is gone. John Wayne has been gone for decades. Shirley MacLaine, remarkably, is still with us, still making films in her 90s. Caine has never sat down and handed the world a tidy ranked list of the people who mattered to him most. He's not that kind of man. But if you go back through his own words, his memoirs, his interviews, and the tributes he's written for the friends he's buried, a pattern shows up. Out of the hundreds of famous names Caine worked with across 7 decades, only a handful actually broke through. Here are 5 of them and the real stories behind why they mattered. Number 5. Roger Moore. When Roger Moore died in May 2017, Caine didn't post a polished studio tribute. He wrote, in his own words on Twitter, that he was devastated at losing one of his oldest and closest friends, and that his world would never be the same again. It reads nothing like a professional condolence. It reads like grief. What's interesting is that Caine and Moore barely worked together on screen. Their friendship wasn't built on a film set at all. It grew out of the London film and social scene of the 1960s and 70s, when 2 working-class boys from very different corners of the city ended up becoming 2 of Britain's biggest leading men at the same time, in completely different lanes. Moore was smooth and unbothered as Bond. Caine was sharper, cockier, more dangerous in his own roles. When Moore died, tributes poured in from Sean Connery, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig, and the Bond producers themselves. Nearly all of them read like professional statements from people honoring a colleague. Caine stood out because it didn't. It read like a man who had actually lost somebody. Number 4. Laurence Olivier. If Moore was the friend Caine leaned on, Olivier was the man who made Caine believe he belonged. In 1972, Caine starred opposite Olivier in Sleuth, a 2-hander with no supporting cast to hide behind, just 2 actors and 1 house for the entire film. Olivier was, by then, arguably the most decorated stage actor Britain had ever produced, a knighted legend whose reputation alone was enough to intimidate other professionals. Caine has said plainly how nervous he was going into it. About a week into filming, Olivier turned to him and said something Caine has repeated in interview after interview for more than 50 years. Olivier told him that at the start of the shoot, he thought he had a servant. By that point, he said he realized he had a partner. Caine has called it the greatest review he ever received. Both men were nominated for the Academy Award for that film. Neither won it, the Oscar going to Marlon Brando for The Godfather that year. But by Caine's own account, the loss barely registered next to what Olivier had told him privately. Decades later, when Caine took on Olivier's old role for the 2007 remake of Sleuth opposite Jude Law, he insisted it wasn't a remake at all, but an entirely new script by Harold Pinter. He said outright he'd never have agreed to simply redo Anthony Schaefer's original screenplay. It's a small detail, but it says something about how much respect he still carried for the man and the film that had once told him he'd earned his place. Number 3. Sean Connery. This is the one long-time Caine watchers already know. Connery and Caine made The Man Who Would Be King together in 1975, a film Caine has repeatedly called his personal favorite among everything he's made. 2 of Britain's biggest stars playing 2 disgraced ex-soldiers conning their way into becoming kings in a fictional corner of Afghanistan. Director John Huston had been trying to get the film made since the 1950s, and over the decades he'd attempted to cast it with Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable, then Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, then Paul Newman and Robert Redford. According to Caine, it was Newman himself who eventually suggested Connery and Caine for the leads, something Caine has said he always found touching, that one of the biggest stars in the world talked 2 British character actors into a role that could have gone to anyone. When Connery died in October 2020 at 90, Caine's tribute on social media didn't hedge. He called him a great star, a brilliant actor, and a wonderful friend, then added a line that only makes sense if you know their film: "The man who would be king was the king." It's Caine in grief, still finding room for the private joke only the 2 of them would fully get. Caine has also talked for years about how, despite both men becoming enormously famous, their friendship never changed in tone from the 2 working actors who made that film together in Morocco in 1975. This one didn't begin as a friendship. It began as an accident in a hotel lobby, and Caine has told the story so many times in his memoir Blowing the Bloody Doors Off and in interview after interview, that the details never move. In the mid-1960s, right after Zulu, The Ipcress File, and Alfie had made him a star in Britain almost back-to-back, Caine was staying alone at the Beverly Hills Hotel for a week, waiting for Shirley MacLaine's overrunning production schedule to free her up for their film together. He'd never been to America before, knew no one, and spent his time sitting in the lobby watching for movie stars the way any young actor visiting Hollywood might. One day he spotted John Wayne registering at the front desk. Wayne noticed him too, walked over and asked his name. When Caine told him, Wayne said he'd seen him in Alfie and told him flatly he was going to be a star. Then, unprompted, he gave him 2 pieces of advice. The first, talk low, talk slow, and don't say too much. Caine has called it the most useful piece of acting advice he ever received, and he has repeated it word for word in interviews for well over 50 years. The second piece is the one people remember because it's completely absurd. Wayne looked down at Caine's shoes and told him to never wear suede again. When Caine asked why, Wayne explained that once he was famous, he'd eventually be standing at a urinal. Someone would recognize him mid-recognition, turn toward him in excitement, and ruin his shoes in the process. Caine has said, laughing, that he took the warning seriously enough to give away every pair of suede shoes he owned. It's a ridiculous story, but it's also revealing. Wayne barely knew him and had nothing to gain, yet he went out of his way twice in one conversation to look out for a young actor he'd only just met. In his own memoir, Caine grouped Wayne alongside people like Laurence Olivier as figures whose words genuinely shaped how he carried himself for the rest of his career. Number 1, Shirley MacLaine. This is the one Caine credits without hesitation for getting him into Hollywood at all. In the mid-1960s, MacLaine was already one of the most powerful women in the business, with contractual approval over who would be cast opposite her. Universal had been considering a young director for her next film, a heist comedy called Gambit, and screened one of his recent movies for MacLaine as a kind of audition. She wasn't sold on the director, but she noticed one of the actors in the film, a young man in glasses named Michael Caine, and picked him on the spot to be her leading man without so much as a script reading. Caine has said outright that this is how he got into Hollywood, and he's credited her kindness specifically, saying that after hearing endless stories about difficult, self-absorbed stars, here was one of the biggest names in the business going out of her way for someone with nothing to offer her in return. MacLaine has told her own version of the story just as warmly, describing on her own website how she spotted the guy with the glasses in that screening room and knew immediately he was right for the part, joking for years afterward that she's the one responsible for launching what she calls his long, glittering career. While Gambit was still shooting, Alfie was released back in Britain and turned Caine into an overnight star at home, so by the time Gambit reached American theaters he wasn't a complete unknown anymore. But MacLaine had picked him before any of that happened, when there was nothing on paper to suggest it would work. Caine and MacLaine went on to work together again nearly 40 years later, on the 2005 comedy Bewitched, and by every account the warmth between them never faded across that gap. So there it is. 5 people across 7 decades, each of whom shaped Caine's life and career in a completely different way. The friend he leaned on hardest in real life. The legend who told him privately that he'd earned his place. The co-star and equal he called the king. The Hollywood cowboy who looked out for a stranger for no reason at all. And the actress who bet on an unknown before he'd proven anything. What's striking is how little these 5 have in common on paper. A knighted stage legend. A Bond actor turned lifelong friend. A fellow working-class Brit who became his closest peer. An American Western icon who barely knew him. A Hollywood star who took a chance on him before he'd earned it. The thread running through all of them isn't fame or timing or nationality. It's that each one, in their own way, either handed Caine an opportunity he hadn't yet earned, or told him something honest he needed to hear at the exact moment he needed to hear it. Caine has said many times that he treats acting like a job and doesn't bring roles home with him. Ruthlessly professional, by his own description. But the way he talks about these 5 people tells a different story. These weren't colleagues he was simply polite to. They were the people who actually shaped him, one story at a time, across a career that started with a Cockney kid from Rotherhithe who left school at 15 and somehow ended up trading advice, loyalty, and genuine affection with some of the most famous people of the 20th century. At 93, with most of the names on this list already gone, Caine is one of the last people alive who can still tell these stories firsthand, which is exactly why they're worth listening to while he's still here to tell them. It's worth noting where Caine actually is in his life right now because it adds weight to all of this. In October 2023 at 90, he confirmed on BBC Radio 4 that he was formally retiring from acting, following the release of The Great Escaper, a film in which he played a World War II veteran who slips out of his care home to attend a D-Day anniversary. He said plainly that he'd had a lead role with incredible reviews and didn't see what could top it, joking that the only parts left for him at his age would be 90-year-old men or maybe 85, and that those wouldn't be leading roles. It wasn't the first time he'd floated retirement, and for years people assumed he'd be tempted back the way he had been before. This time he meant it. 2 years later, in December 2025, Caine accepted a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Red Sea International Film Festival and used the moment to reflect rather than tease a comeback, telling the audience simply that he'd had all the luck a person could ask for. It was the kind of line that sums up how he talks about his whole career now. Not with bitterness about what's ending, but with something closer to gratitude for how long it lasted and who was there for it. That's part of why this list matters more now than it would have a decade ago. Caine isn't making new films, isn't generating new co-star friendships, isn't adding fresh names to the people who shaped him. What exists is what exists. 7 relationships formed over the better part of a century, each one already complete. He spent the last few years doing what a lot of people in their 90s end up doing, whether they're famous or not, looking backward, tallying up who actually mattered, and finding that the answer isn't complicated at all. It's not directors or box office numbers or awards. It's a short list of people who either gave him something before he'd earned it or told him something true when he needed to hear it, plus the one person who simply chose to stay. For a man who spent his whole professional life pretending not to bring anything home with him, that's about as personal an accounting as Michael Caine has ever given anyone.